talk to you and remind you again what you already know, but talk to you about the mission and exactly what it is and how we engage that and how it engages us as the people of God. And so if you'll turn in your Bibles with me to Matthew chapter 28, the verse that will give us the sense of direction for today. Matthew chapter 28 and verse 19. Jesus speaking to his disciples, "Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you." That mission of Jesus is pretty clear, I would say, and I think we would all agree, and it's simply go. Go and make disciples. Several generations have come and gone now since Jesus mandated that to us as the church. And every generation has had to assume the responsibility of forwarding it and transmitting, delivering that message to the next generation. Amen? This past week, we were privileged to be in California with our son and daughter, who they are co-pastors at Bakersfield First Church of the Nazarene. And in that 100-year-old congregation plus, we were in the sanctuary. They'd been there a number of years. On the front of their sanctuary, they have a large banner on both sides. One says, "From generation to generation." A sense of awareness that even in a 100-year-old congregation, what is important and essential is that this mission is transferred from generation to generation. They have a multi-generational church and folks of all different ages. They've transitioned pretty much to a more contemporary worship style and set like you have, but I noticed as I walked through the sanctuary and those pews, they've probably got about 50 pews spread out through the sanctuary. It'll hold 300-400 people. That in every pew, there was one hymnal in every song rack. Not a lot, but there was one, and they were pretty ragged and not. And so I asked my son, I said, "Do y'all use the hymnals?" He says, "No, we just have them there for folks who feel comfortable with a hymnal in front of them." And no one fusses about it, but it struck me that there is the reality of that, the importance of transmitting the gospel from generation to generation. There was a time when those pews were filled with hymnals, and certainly that's perfectly as it should have been during that time. And now the transition. We were there on Sunday morning. They had Celebrate Recovery Sunday. And about 30 or 40 folks walked across the front of that church talking about, "I was addicted. I was bound in sin." And then they had cardboard testimonies. Have you seen those? And they had written on one side, and the other side they flipped over, "But now I am free." And the whole congregation celebrated. And I was thrilled to see the transmission of the mission of that day becoming relevant to reaching the folks that are present in their community and all around their community. Because it's like the runners in a race, in a relay. We've just come through the Olympics, and of course, we watch many different events, but one of those is the relay, where the passing of the baton. And 4 runners run, and the critical moment in that relay is that handoff from the runner that's going forward to the one that will continue to go forward. It's that critical handoff where the baton changes from one hand to the other, and the race continues to go forward. The race is always moving forward. It's not moving backwards. It's coming from here, moving toward the mission, which is to cross the finish line and to go, and it passes through several generations before the race is completed. Amen? We are in that race. We are in that race as the people of God. Your theme now is forward in faith. It is moving forward, not backwards, forward, and handing off the baton, the mission, and making sure that it's transferred clearly and accurately. Jesus said, "Go make disciples of all the nations, teaching them all the things that I have taught you." Because every generation needs to hear this gospel that is relevant to them where they are and meeting the needs that they are experiencing in their life. Another observation I made this week in California was that's a pretty dry and barren place where there's absence of water. My son, the parsonage they live in, have a sprinkler system throughout their yard. He's not a particularly attentive person to yard care and stuff as much as his dad and his mom are. So his mom was very concerned that the yard was dead in a lot of places. And so she's out digging around trying to find, but what she noticed, I have to credit her. I got in on the back end of fixing the problem, but she diagnosed the problem is that she looked in the backyard and there's this water bubbling up. It's just a big pool of water bubbling up, but none of the rest of the sprinkler heads were working. And so she began to dig, and she found out some roots had grown up and pushed up and cracked the line, and the transmission system wasn't working anymore. The water was flowing in, but it wasn't flowing out. And in that particular location, it was overflowing. There was an abundance of water, but everything on the perimeters was dry and barren and scorched, and it needed water. And the delivery system had to be fixed. So we had to cut and put together some new pipes and we turned it on. Suddenly water was going everywhere. It occurred to me that in many times that's much like the church. We're very focused on what is coming into us and the grace that we sang about today and receiving that. And we come to services such as this and the grace is bubbling up and it's flowing over and we're swimming in it, enjoying and embracing. But if we're not careful, the delivery system from here to there stops at this place. And we find ourselves having to come here to get immersed in the grace, that our neighbors, their yard is dry, their lives are barren, the people we meet, they're broke because the delivery system of grace has been aborted at a place sometimes called the church. Because we lose sight of the mission. Roots grow up, things grow in, they push and bring stress on a system that can sometimes break down, and our focus becomes about getting more here and living. And if you want some of what we've got, here's where it happens. There's abundance here. Yet Jesus says to go, make disciples, move from here. And so we're always trying to teach and train and equip and adjust the system so that we become carriers. We become the distribution center of God's grace and His love. Go make disciples is what Jesus says. As complicated as that is, it's really not that complicated. It hasn't changed in 2,000 years. The essence of that, it just hasn't. Oh, the flair of it and the presentation of it may have a little bit, but the mission itself has never changed. When I was 16 years old, the very first job that I had was in a Dairy Queen. Thank you for talking about Dairy Queen this morning. A setup. 16 years old, I went to work at a Dairy Queen, and my first public job, and part of the training we had in Dairy Queen was how to make an ice cream cone. You know, Dairy Queen is a franchise, and their mission is to make every visit a pleasurable experience. That's kind of their mission statement. And so I learned how to make these ice cream cones, and you know, there's an art to making ice cream cones. Anybody here ever worked at Dairy Queen? There's a sister. There's two sisters there. And so at Dairy Queen, I went through this training that's in a book and explains, but it's hands-on. You get it, and you got to do it. You got to do it just right. Because at the end of the day, when the ice cream cone's done and it's delivered to the cone, the ice cream, it's all about the curl. Amen? Right, ladies? Can I get a witness there? It's all about the curl at the end. Anybody can put ice cream in a cone. I had one this week in California at Freddy's Ice Cream, and I thought, well, no wonder they call it Freddy's. I mean, it was all over. It was running down. They wrapped 3 napkins around it and handed it to me so it wouldn't get on my hand. So it's about the curl. So every time I go to a Dairy Queen, my wife, she's like going, oh, I don't think I'm going to go in. I'm watching very closely at the execution, because it tells me whether or not the franchise training is coming forward. And sometimes you'll see that they're very exact, and they hand it to you, and it starts that little ball, and then the curl, it's just, you got to know how to, it's just you kind of like this, and then boom, and then you pull it off, and there it is. It's just a work of art. But sometimes I don't see that when I show up at a Dairy Queen. It's just kind of like you went to Casey's and filled your cone up with ice cream, and it loses the artistic flair. And I will say to the little lady or young man or young lady that's delivering it, and I say to them, you know, when I was 16, I used to work at a Dairy Queen. And typically their response is something like, as my wife is turning around walking the other direction, their response is something like, whatever. But their mission, obviously, is to deliver ice cream, but the packaging is so that it is consistent from generation to generation. You see, in the church, the transmission of the gospel is essential from generation to generation. That its very core and the value of it, that it doesn't change. That it is the same. That Jesus came, Jesus died, Jesus rose, Jesus is coming again. And there is a barren and dry and thirsty land in need of water, and people who are in need of something sweet in their lives to be delivered by no less than us, the church. Now, when Jesus called together the folks that are going to be the delivery system in the Gospel of Luke, he says to them, if anyone would come after me, he must, three things. One, deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Now, I'm fairly certain that in the church that we have done pretty well and understand clearly the deny ourselves and take up the cross. Deny ourselves, of course, meaning, and as we understand the gospel and sharing it, that you are living a life of sin, it's breaking you, so deny yourself of that, turn from that, and walk away. Deny yourself. Take up your cross. Begin to live for Jesus. Die to yourself. Begin to walk. We understand that in our holiness tradition as coming to the place in our life beyond once we've turned from our sin and walked, that now we turn from ourselves. We begin to live in and die on the cross of Christ daily and reflecting his image. But Jesus not only just said, deny yourself, take up your cross, but what was the third? Follow me. Follow me. That's where the transmission of this gospel begins to go. Once a transformation happens, it's the transmission of this mission and this message that has to happen, and that comes in the following. That's where we as a church today need to sharpen things up, I think, is in the following. The following is the difficult part, though, honestly. It's the challenging. It's the 24/7. It's when the world you feel like the world has a conspiracy against you, but you're still willing to follow right through. And keep your eye fixed on the finish line and begin to move forward. Those are the kind of disciples that Jesus is looking for, those that are following him where he goes and doing what he does. I love that DirecTV commercial. Have you seen it? It had Peyton Manning on it, but the first one started with Rob Lowe. And Rob Lowe, it kind of walks in. He's real scrawny and skinny, and then it morphs into a strong. And he says, "And don't be like that Rob Lowe. Be like this one." And Peyton Manning has a real squeaky voice and kind of girly sounding, and it says, "Don't be like that Peyton Manning. Be like this one." Well, when I saw that commercial, I got to thinking. I wonder if Jesus kind of sitting back, going, "Hey, don't be like that disciple. Be like this one. Be like this one, the one that follows me and goes where I go." It's the same challenge today that the disciples had and religious leaders had back in Jesus' day. They're all good with the teaching. They embrace it. They endorse him to a level. But this following business, I don't know. This gets just a little bit on the radical side If you want to know what I mean by that, in Mark chapter 2, Jesus records this story about Jesus in verse 15. And while Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples. For there were many who followed him. Where did they follow him to? To Levi's house, having dinner with tax collectors and sinners. But when the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Could somebody please help us with that? We love his teaching. We love his presence. We love being around him. But seriously, why is he hanging out in Levi's house surrounded by tax collectors and sinners? And why isn't he down at the church where the rest of us are at, where the springs of living water are bubbling out and we're being refreshed from our own teaching every week? Why isn't Jesus down here with us? And on hearing this, I think it's interesting. Jesus always had an ear tuned to what was being said around him, didn't he? He may be focused here, but he's hearing what's going on over here. And so his response to them was, hey, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I've not come to call the righteous, but the sinner. My mission is to take this living water and distribute it to the places that are barren and dying. And the healthy don't need that kind of distribution. They're finding all that. So those who followed him were learning that. But not everybody's happy with that outcome. Even today, not everybody's happy when the church begins to take serious the mission of going, following, making disciples. The church struggles with that in many, many places. When I pastored in Clarksville, Tennessee, and I have some good friends I met here today from Clarksville, Tennessee. We have common ground. When I pastored in Clarksville, Tennessee, it was at First Church on the south side of town. We had all kinds of ministries going to all kinds of people. And we were always looking for opportunities to reach into the community, to impact lives, and distribute this living water through a delivery system out into the community and not just kind of gathered in. We had great worship services like you do here and a great band, and it was awesome. 300-400 people gather in, and it could just kind of stay there all day and worship. But we were always looking for a distribution system. So the city every year in Clarksville has a big event called Rivers and Spires. And it's downtown in there, and a lot of steeples, they call it the spires, a lot of old churches downtown, and the Cumberland River runs through. So we had this big event, and 20,000 to 30,000 people make their way through in a week's time down there. Along the river, they set up stages, 4 or 5 different stages, where they have different groups that sing and music, and it's close to Nashville, so they bring in a few key groups out of Nashville, and then fill it in with other groups. And our church was invited, our worship band, to go down on the river and play, and to carry the gospel. And folks, it wasn't a come in and sit down. It was just kind of a walk-by venue. There you just play, and the crowds mingle around, and they come. And so we went down on our assigned evening, a Friday, and went down. And when we got there, they assigned us to our stage. And when we got there, we discovered that we had been assigned to do our presentation and our outreach on the Budweiser stage. And so, wow, it's the Budweiser stage, huh? So we set up and got everything all lined up. Had a great evening there singing on the Budweiser stage. There's this big banner all the way across. These are big professional type stages. It said, Budweiser, King of Beers. On Saturday morning when I got up and opened the newspaper, there was a picture on the front page of the Leaf Chronicle that had First Church worship band on the Budweiser stage at the Rivers and Spires. Well, I was ecstatic. I said, that is so awesome. And so I showed up at Tuesday night at our band practice to kind of kind of go over and celebrate and high fives and the opportunity that God gave us to minister and kind of debrief that thing. And as I was standing in the front of the sanctuary and with the band and around, and they were excited about the opportunity God had given them and to play and sing about Him there, I saw a gentleman coming through the foyer of the church. And I knew him from, I'd had several conversations prior to this. And so I thought, I probably should go out and engage him there before he comes into here, because I'm sure he's not here for the same purpose that we are gathered tonight. So I went out and I met him in the foyer, and he had a newspaper in his hand, and he was slapping it on his hand. And he says, "Have you seen this?" And I go, I said, "Yes." He says, "I can't believe this, that we Nazarenes, holiness people, are down on Rivers and Spires singing on the Budweiser stage." And he just went on and on and on and listened. He says, "And I want you to know that I'm sending this article along with a letter to the district superintendent." And I paused and I said, "Well, good, because that's what I was getting ready to do. I just hadn't got a chance to do it yet." And so we kind of bantered back and forth, and he continued to share his. And so finally, when it came to a pause, I debated whether to continue the conversation or just let it. And I decided, no, I probably should address this. And so I spoke to my brother, and I said, "Well, listen, I need you to process something here with me, and it's this. I'm going to ask you a question." And these were rhetorical questions I was asking in nature. And I said, let's suppose that that last Friday night, Jesus, we know He was here in spirit and truth, but let's suppose that Jesus was here walking around in Clarksville in the flesh, in sandals. Where do you think that Jesus would have been last Friday night? Would He have been uptown at a prayer meeting, or would He have been down on the river where 20,000 people are mixing and mingling? And I said, down on the river. And I said, furthermore, when He was down on the river, where do you suppose Jesus, of all the stages He could have stood on, would have chosen to stand? And I said, the Budweiser stage. And I said, and here's the reason why. And here's what I think might have happened. I can just see in my mind Jesus standing front and center stage on the Budweiser stage and saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, so good to see you tonight at Rivers and Spires. Hope you're having a good time with your families. You're moving around. I know that so many of you go through your life and you're thirst seekers and you're trying to satisfy things in your life. And for many of you, Budweiser has become the king of your life, the thirst satisfier. But I want to make a proclamation to you tonight. Budweiser perhaps is the king of beers. But my name is Jesus, and I'm the King of Kings. And I dispense the living water. And I will give you something that will cause you to thirst no more. And would go on and begin to speak to that crowd about the reality of life and what they were searching, rather than standing and speaking in condemnation to him. And I continued on that little sermonette to my friend as he turned around and put the paper under his arm and he walked out the door as I was finishing my sermon. You see, the reality is Jesus says, go, make disciples. Levi's house, the Budweiser stage, wherever that takes us, where parched and broken people are. Because the reality is in the church, the disbursement system, the distribution system is flawed. And it's bubbling up, and we're living in it and rowing in it and being refreshed ourselves, but it's not moving beyond the places where we gather. And the land all around us is dry and thirsty and parched. And just the minute the living water begins to move into it, you will begin to see transformation take place. Follow me, Jesus said, and I will make you to become fishers of men. And I will teach you how to be living water. So what does it mean to follow Jesus? What does that look like? In your Bibles in Matthew chapter 9, let me just read a passage here and walk through very quickly. In Matthew chapter 9 and verse 35, this is what it looks like in a day of your life and mine to follow Jesus. This is what that would look like. And Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. And when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless and like sheep without a shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. Jesus said, if you want to be my disciple, deny yourself, take up your cross, and then follow me. Follow me. And if you follow me, we're going to end up in Levi's house. And we're going to end up down on the Budweiser street. We're going to end up where people are harassed, and they're helpless, and they're broken, and they're thirsty in their lives. So Jesus says, if you want to be a follower, here's where we're going to go. One, we're going to go into the mission fields. We're going to go where people are at. We understand it. We're a very mission-driven church, the Church of the Nazarene. We have been from the very beginning who we are. As a result of that, we're in 159 countries around the world because we've been driven. Our DNA drives us to mission. But in that, I'm concerned that somewhat our distribution system in our own Jerusalems is flawed, because we are very much ready to gather resources as we should and funds and distribute them from here over there, bypassing the dry and parched ground that is all around us. And it is not an either or. It is all and Jesus said, and you will be my witnesses in where? Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. You'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, right in your own neighborhood where you live. There is dry and thirsty people and parched ground. Across town in Judea or surrounding communities, in Samaria, in our multicultural congregations and ethnic groups that are moving into Iowa, we have to have eyes, and to the other. We have to have a distribution system that moves into all of those areas. And when it's not, it's important that we get in and we dig to the source of it, like my wife did this week, and we find where it's flawed and where it's bubbling up, and we repair that so that there's plenty of living water to distribute. There is no shortage of grace. It's the distribution. And Jesus says, if you want to follow me, then we're going into all of the places. One of my challenges this year at District Assembly for the churches was let's look at our Jerusalems again. Let's include our Jerusalem in our missional outreach. I preach all across Iowa, as pastor indicated, in over 70 congregations. And every place I go, I see missional DNA present. But the reality of it is, in most places I go, that missional DNA is just about transmitting that gospel to the othermost parts of the earth. Because all around them and in their churches, they are shrinking and dying. And Jesus says, follow me. God bless you for going there, but follow me across the street. Follow me to the neighboring communities. Follow me wherever there are people. And so it was that Jesus moved in those. So if you want to follow me, be my disciple, follow me not only those places, but follow me with your eyes wide open. Jesus says, look, the fields are white for harvest. Look, are you looking? Are you seeing them? If you're not seeing them, it's because you're not looking with eyes to see them, because they are present everywhere. And Jesus, the word said that as Jesus went, he saw the people every place he went. All kinds of people he saw. But we have to have our eyes to see as we follow along with Jesus and see what Jesus is seeing in those moments and in those places. We become so tunnel vision that our view of grace in the gospel is whatever route we take between here and our home. And that becomes the sphere of grace that, and the tunnel of grace that we look through. But we move in and out of that. We need to begin to pray, God, help me to see what is around me. That which I've been looking at and have not recognized. 2 years ago at District Assembly, I heard a pastor give a report, or someone within the assembly, I don't remember the exact person that gave it. But they talked about in their church having preached a message or delivering a challenge for people to open their eyes this week and look at the harvest field. Just intentionally leave here today saying, God, show me something I haven't seen that's there all the time. That's a pretty good prayer to pray as you leave here today. God, show me something this week that I haven't seen, but it's been there all along. So one lady took the challenge. She began to pray, and she left church on Sunday. God, show me. Monday morning, she shows up at the office. She sits down, and she looks across the office complex, and in comes another lady that she knew was very familiar with. The lady came into the workplace, and she had sunglasses on, and she went to her respective place, her cubicle, and she sat down, and as the morning progressed, she had her sunglasses on. Which isn't an unusual thing, actually, when you wear sunglasses a lot coming in. Sometimes it takes a while to realize, whoa, no wonder life seems so dark today. I've got my sunglasses on. And so after a certain amount of time had passed, she got up from her desk and she went over to this lady and said, whatever her name was, Susie, you got your sunglasses on. And she paused and she pulled her glasses down a little bit and she had a black eye. And she slipped them back up. And she said to this lady who had been praying, God, give me eyes to see what's all around me. And she said to her, my husband hit me this morning. And it opened up a conversation. As a result of that prayer, that Jesus encounter, and that conversation, God moved this lady who prayed that prayer into a ministry that would change her life and the lives of hundreds of ladies. God moved her into a ministry to walk around, she said, and to look for ladies that are wearing sunglasses when they ought not be wearing sunglasses. You get what she was saying? To be aware and sensitive to what was going on, and she started a ministry for domestic abuse out of that one prayer. Now that's following Jesus. And seeing what Jesus is seeing and responding to what Jesus wants to respond to and pouring Jesus' grace into that moment. Jesus says, if you want to be my disciple, take up your cross, turn, stop living for yourself and in your sinful ways. Be filled with my spirit, die unto yourself, live into the cross of Jesus, dying daily, but then follow me. That's what it means to be a disciple. Following, not just learning, but following. And so we follow him with eyes to see. I pastored in Hera, Oklahoma for several years. And while I was there, every Wednesday evening, we had testimony and praise service and, sing a few songs. And does anybody have a testimony praise this week? And you've been there if you've been a part of Wednesday night services in Church of Nazarene over the years. And for the most part, it was all very good, but mostly pretty predictable. And so every Wednesday night, as I stood up front and I played guitar and we sang a few choruses and I set it down and opened it up, Mary Bell. She sat about where Deb's sitting, right there, step all the way to the edge. She'd stand up and she would say something like this. I'd like, and it's sincere, I'm not making fun here, I'm just, this is going somewhere. She'd say something like this. I'd like to ask the church to pray for my son in Alaska. He's lost. We didn't raise him that way. He's away from the Lord. And I'd like to ask that God would send somebody his way and cross his path. That he would find Jesus. And then she would sit down. Tears. Everybody's kind of like, those that were hearing. But it's kind of like, okay, yeah, we're praying. We're praying. So every Wednesday night. Anybody have a testimony? Mary Bell, stand up. I said, well, thank you, Mary Bell. But one Wednesday night when I went through the same order of service. Mary Bell stood again, but this time something was different. I could tell. You know, when you're trying to pay attention, you could tell it was. And she stood, and she didn't start right away. She paused, and she was weeping. And she said, "Y'all know what I request every week." She said, "This morning I was praying for my son, and I was praying, oh God, would you send somebody across his path today to love on him, show him Jesus." She says, as I was crying and praying that, she says, I heard the Holy Spirit say to me, "Mary Bell, whose boy's path are you crossing?" Mary Bell, there's another mama someplace in the world that's praying for her boy right there in Harrow, Oklahoma. And she's praying every morning like you are. Oh, God, would you send somebody across my boy's path today? And she started weeping. And she said, and I repented and I asked God to start giving me eyes to see other mamas' boys. So it's when you start following, it stops becoming all about this bubbling spring that I'm living in and the grace every day that I'm taking. And there's nothing wrong with that. Please don't hear me saying because there's plenty of grace and this, but it's about the distribution of following Jesus. And he says, you know, if you want to be my disciple, deny yourself, take up your cross, but follow me. Follow me. And so she began to follow him in new kinds of ways. If we're going to follow Jesus, the Bible says Jesus had compassion. They weren't just projects. They weren't just people to be fixed like a broken toy and set up and then move on. He had compassion on them. He lived into their lives and into their brokenness. Where they were, it was the lame. He'd come alongside when everyone else was going, wait. It was those with leprosy that everyone else would back up. But the compassion of Jesus drove him into their lives. It was Levi, who Jesus would endure the accusations of becoming a wine bibber and a drunkard at the hands of the unkind and those who would make remarks about who he was in his ministry. It was having compassion enough to live in and not be concerned about what others would think about this association that we have when Jesus gives us eyes to see brokenness. Clarksville, Tennessee. Again, that was my latest. I pastored 38 years, so most of so it comes out of that last 14 years there of God's grace. And so one Sunday morning I walked in, as our church reached many different kinds of people from all stratas of life, and I walked in, and one Sunday morning I saw a lady standing against the wall. I had not met her before, but we had a lot of folks come through our recovery ministry on Friday night, then make their way to Sunday morning, and they weren't coat and tie kind of people. We all just kind of mixed together. And I went over to her and I introduced myself and I said, hi. I said, I've not met you before. My name's Kim. And she kind of dropped her head down and she looked up and she said, my name's Barbara. And I said, well, Barbara, it's nice to meet you. I'm glad you're here today. And she was standing kind of like, see how these lights here are close to the wall and it makes a dark shadow in between. She was standing in the shadow on purpose so as not to be seen. And so we visited a little more, and eventually it came around that I was the pastor. And she says to me, oh, you must be Brett's dad. Well, that's a proud moment. Brett's my son, who I was with this week. He was on my staff for 7 years with me, he and his wife in Clarksville. We served together. She said, you must be Brett's dad. Brett was overseer of the Celebrate Recovery Ministry. I said, yeah. I said, Brett's my son. And she says, oh, I just have to tell you, Brett's the first man that's ever hugged me that I knew didn't want something from me. Barbara was a prostitute. And that encounter of grace spoke so deep into her heart. He's the first man that ever hugged me that I knew didn't want something from me. There was something more in that hug and compassion. And I was beaming and in tears, and I said, well, it's so good to have you here today. About 2 or 3 weeks go by, we're having a baptism on Sunday morning. All of our candidates had been prepared. They'd been through baptism class. We'd done video testimonies of them. They all had T-shirts so that, you never know when you baptize a lot of folks, a lot of times what they're going to come and get baptized in. And so we had matching black T-shirts that said Community of Hope. And so everybody was all dressed and ready to go, and the service had led up to it. And one of the associates came up to me and said, hey, listen, there's this lady out here named Barbara who wants to get baptized. And I said, really? I said, well, that's great. They said, well, wait a minute. She hadn't been through class. And I said, oh, okay. And we don't have any more shirts. I said, oh, okay. And she didn't bring a towel, and we don't have any extras. I was like, oh, okay. I said, well, good, bring her up. Let's baptize her. And they're kind of like, whoa. We haven't. And so anyway, Barbara makes her way up on the platform, up to the baptistry. And she smiled real big when she came out and saw me. And she climbs up the steps. And as Barbara's stepping into the baptistry, our baptistry was an 8-foot horse trough filled with water, and we had a black drape around the front of it, and we heated it at nighttime with cattle water tank heaters, and then took them out in the morning so it was warm. And it was fortunate we had a warm water day. Sometimes it wasn't always that way. And Barbara makes her way up to the platform, and she gets about this close to me. I'm helping her up, and she goes, hi, Pastor Kim. And when she did, I could smell it on her breath. I could smell. She had had at least one to get up her courage for the day. And so I'm standing here. There's Barbara, 1 foot in the water and 1 foot on the step, staring me right in the face with a smile on her face, saying, hi, Pastor Kim, thank you. I mean, what's a guy going to do, right? Well, Barbara, listen, I'm smelling a little there. We're going to have to wait on this. But somehow, understanding, or at least I believe it was the grace of God moving in that relationship, drawing her to that place, I made a decision. Whether you agree or don't, I guess it's done. It doesn't really matter. That we're going forward. And so I helped her into the baptistry. And probably if I had to rewind and rethink just a minute, I might not have held the mic in front of her and said, Barbara, would you like to say something? I'm just saying. Because when I did, it was, and no one out there knew what I knew, okay? And she was sincere, and she was probably as sober as a lot of people out there who were drunk on other stuff. She just had a little courage. And she said, Larry's the guy that drove her every Friday night and brought her on Sunday morning in the van. Larry, it's dark out in the sanctuary. She can't see anybody. The lights are on. Larry, I love you, Larry. I could hear Larry go, I love you too, Barbara. Brett. Brett's sitting down over there. She goes, I love you, Brett. She looks me right in the face. Pastor Kim, I love you. And I'm thinking, okay, let's get on with this. Barbara, I baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Down she went, and she came up with both hands in the air, tattoos on her arms, old T-shirt on. I love everybody. I love you, Larry. I'm going, okay, Barbara. I love you, Brett. Okay, Barbara. I love everybody. She wasn't that inebriated, but it was out of overflow of an encounter of compassion and grace that drew her to a fountain that had been flowing out into her life. Look, I don't know how you feel about all of that, but I know what was happening in that moment was following Jesus. That in my mind, in my heart, and in several years of reflection now, in no way could I ever imagine Jesus standing, facing, knowing her backstory and where she had come to, looking at her and saying, well, Barbara, I'm sorry, but you're not going to get to be baptized today. Because, and begin to name, in my wildest imagination and the height of any legalism that I've ever lived in my life, and I've shared in plenty, I couldn't imagine Jesus meeting and encountering her in that kind of a way. Because when you deny yourself, take up your cross and follow Jesus, you will find yourself in places where you have to question why you do what you do and who it is you're doing it for and in whose name you're doing it in. And finally, the last thing, that if I'm going to follow Jesus, it not only involved that it requires that I'm involved, that I have compassion. It's one thing to touch people and say, you know, God bless you. Go around and touch. It's another thing to embrace them and live into their lives and live into their brokenness and be broken by their brokenness and uncomfortable with their sin. It's another thing to get up that close and personal and your own space being invaded and your own time schedule being invaded and your own value system being challenged because you're willing to embrace. We changed the mantra and the missional message of our Compassionate Ministry Center in Clarksville. After we were into it for a while, it was touching our community with the gospel of Christ and with His grace. But after a while, we realized that touching wasn't just enough. And we said, no, we have to be about embracing our community. Hugging, coming up close, holding them when they don't want to be held sometimes, and living into their brokenness. His name was Mike. Him and his wife showed up at church on Sunday morning. They weren't of the Compassionate Ministry crowd. They were a young, sharp-looking young adult couple. Mike was a musician. His lifelong dream was to make it big in Nashville. There are a lot of those around Clarksville and places, right? There's a lot of them. Mike played every Friday night and Saturday night down at several of the little low-key bars and stuff. And his name was up. He played with another guy named Mike. And one of the marquees always said, Mike and Mike. And Mike came to our church. He's a friend of cousin, a relative that brought him. And living water was flowing out, inviting this young. So I began to build a relationship with Mike. Him and his wife went through some difficult marriage situations, and I was there, tried to come along, go to lunch with Mike, get to know him as a friend. Not preaching to him. He'd come on Sunday and hear that, just kind of hearing his story and living into it. I began to pray, oh God, give me an opportunity to be closer to Mike in that situation. You know, not smothering, but closer. So I asked my small group on a Sunday night, would y'all pray with me that I can get closer to Mike? And God figures out a way to do that. We all prayed that night and left. The next week on Tuesday, I came home and there was a U-Haul truck backing into the house next door to me. It was a rental house, and Mike moved in next door to me. And I began to develop a relationship more deeply with Mike and through a series of... And so after a couple of years, this was a long-term, 4, 5, 6 year. It didn't happen overnight. Mike, in one of our meetings together, he said, hey, listen, I've cut a CD. And I'm debuting some of the songs on it tonight, or this Friday night down at, you remember the Front Page Deli, downtown Clarksville. It's a sandwich shop. Sandwich shop by day and bar by night. I'd been there for plenty of sandwiches during the day. But Mike's playing on Friday night at 11 o'clock. I went to one of my staff members and we talked about it. And I said, hey, brother, I said, man, I ain't never been to no bar before. And would you go with me? I said, I'm going to go down and surprise Mike, and we'll go down and listen to his song. So we make our way down. Front Page Deli, Friday night, had to pay a cover charge. Didn't know what a cover charge was. Just $5 just to get in, I guess, the door, and you buy. So we paid it. We stood out on the line on the sidewalk, paid our cover charge, get in, kind of made our way through. And I'd never seen that many people there for sandwiches at noon, but it was full. We made our way through that place all the way to the back of the deli and up the steps to the upstairs where the music was going to be happening, and got upstairs walking around as I'm making my way through very unfamiliar territory for me. You know, just feeling a little bit uncomfortable there. I started to feel more comfortable when I started seeing a few people from the church there. And I felt comfortable and they began to feel increasingly uncomfortable. It's like, who's the last person in the world you expect to see at Front Page Deli at 11:30 on Friday night but your pastor when you're having a refreshing drink? So we bantered there a little bit and engaged. I went up to the stage and I spoke to Mike. And he was like, whoa, I didn't tell him I was coming. I said, hey man, I know you're busy getting tuned, and they're tuning and doing all their stuff. And I said, I just want to come and hear that song you were talking about tonight. It sounds really good, and won't stay long, but we're going. He goes, wow. He's just like, wow, thanks. And so I just turn around and walk away, and he plays, and man, it was loud. I mean, I thought these people that were there on Friday night, they've complained about how loud music was on Sunday morning. And I thought, I don't want to hear it anymore. Because it was loud. We listened and we made our way out, all right? I continued my relationship with Mike. On Easter Sunday morning, my last Sunday in Clarksville, Tennessee, before I come to this assignment, on Sunday morning, Mike Robinson stood on the stage of Clarksville First Church with his guitar and sang Big Daddy Weave's song, I Am Redeemed. I am redeemed. And God saved that young man and saved his family over that 6 years and I'm not boasting because I have to, of the courage to don't care what anybody says, because Jesus is going there Friday night and I just want to hang out. Listen, if we could capture that and quit being so concerned about what others are going to say or think. I'm not talking about throwing our faith to the wind or becoming around. I'm talking about following Jesus, staying real close to him in those places, and being safe and secure in his arms. And that song protects us there as well as it does. We sing safe and secure about coming in here and feeling like we're all fortressed in and we got this shell around us and the world can't get to us. Well, we need to be getting to the world instead of worrying about the world getting to us. So it's all about the curl. It's what the product looks like when we're all done at the end of the day. And I commend you for being that kind of people. Keep being that. Keep living that. Keep relearning that. Keep working on the handoff from generation. We've got all generations in here. You've got to hand it forward. Hand it forward. And let's stay true to the mission. For Jesus' sake, amen. God bless you.